Tenemos el honor de estar reunidos en la oficina de Tri-Valley Cares, una institución que tiene más de 40 años aquí en el área de la Bahía y que es una institución que ha dejado una huella en la historia del movimiento antinuclear de los Estados Unidos, ícono del movimiento antinuclear, fundadora de esta organización y el corazón de esta organización que ahora se expande en muchas direcciones. Y esta reunión es también posiblemente la primera en español para distintas transmisiones, por así decirlo. Mi nombre es Marcia Campos, yo trabajo en un proyecto que se llama Al Norte de Tlatelolco, también con Alcaldes por la Paz para América Latina, y tengo el honor de conocer a Mary Lea desde hace bastante tiempo. Mary Lea nos va a dar una visión de la historia de este laboratorio y simultáneamente la historia de la organización de Tri-Valley Cares y los objetivos que están persiguiendo en este momento, incluida la difusión de esta situación a la gente que vive en el entorno del laboratorio de armas nucleares con riesgos altísimos de contaminación. Entonces quiero dar la bienvenida a todos y a todas y proceder a presentarnos. Vamos a dejar la persona posiblemente más representativa al final para que también ya entremos en materia con Mary Lea y esta historia heroica, se puede decir, que ella tiene que contarnos con relación al laboratorio de armas nucleares. Entonces, por favor, Michelle, ¿por qué no te presentas?
Claro que sí, mi nombre es Michelle White, yo soy productora y host de Información es Poder en la radio KIQI en San Francisco. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Michelle White and I produce and host Información es Poder in San Francisco through KIQI 1010 AM.
Miguel.
I am Miguel Perez and part of the direction of La Radio Flash, it's a radio online, and also with Michelle White and Marcia Campos, we participate in KPFA on Voces del Pueblo. And we are very interested to produce this, it's not a conference, it's an interview, but it's not exactly the rules of the interview. It's more like how we can put a history together.
Mm-hmm. Scott.
Hi, my name is Scott Yunt. I'm the staff attorney here at Tri-Valley Cares, which stands for Communities Against a Radioactive Environment. I've worked here for about the last 10 years, but the organization has been doing hard work out here in Livermore, California since 1983. We mainly monitor the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, but also the nuclear weapons complex it's a part of. I'm happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Raisa Marciscano. I been with Tri-Valley Cares for the last 5 months. I'm actually the community bilingual organizer, and I reach out the Hispanic community and I let them know what's going on with the Livermore Lab and the Site 300.
Do you want to go ahead and do it in Spanish?
Mi nombre es Raisa Marciscano. He trabajado con la Tri-Valley Cares por los últimos 5 meses y mi meta es alcanzar a los latinos para decirles lo que está pasando con el laboratorio de Livermore y el sitio 300 para orientarlos y decirles lo que está pasando con contaminaciones y los explosivos en el laboratorio. Gracias.
Nombre es Mary Lea Kelly y voy a hablar en inglés. My name is Mary Lea Kelly, and I am Executive Director here at Tri-Valley Cares in Livermore, California. We also have offices in Tracy, California. Tri-Valley Cares was founded in 1983 by neighbors of the laboratory, including some people who worked at the laboratory. We've grown from an initial handful of people to 6,200 members. Tri-Valley Cares is unique in many ways. One of the ways in which we're unique is that Tri-Valley Cares connects the issues of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons policy with the issues of environmental contamination and health effects, so that we work both on the policy side and on the environmental and health side of things. Tri-Valley Cares does original research. We use the Freedom of Information Act and other right-to-know laws. We conduct interviews, do basic journalistic kinds of investigation in terms of what's going on at Livermore Lab and what's going on within the U.S. nuclear weapons complex. We have a newsletter called Citizens Watch. We monitor the laboratory very carefully. Part of our work is to bring the community into the decision-making tables and the decision-making rooms and make sure that the public and the residents have a part in decisions that affect their lives. One of our basic tenets when we were founded was the idea that people have a right to participate in decisions that affect their lives. So whether it's the environmental cleanup of the contamination that's in our water, in our groundwater, polluting the soil, polluting the air, or whether Livermore Laboratory should be designing and developing new horrific weapons of nuclear mass destruction, we bring the public into that discussion, and we give the public information, and we give the public the tools that it needs in order for people to actually participate effectively in those discussions and in those decisions.
Mary Leah, your voice is being carried to the large community. I understand that you lived in Livermore. How did you get involved in what
Sure.
have you seen happening throughout the long period of time that you've been, in front at the helm of this
Yes.
organization?
I moved to Livermore with my young son in 1976, originally to attend classes at the University of California at Berkeley School of Journalism. That was my previous career. And I only knew that there was this super secret laboratory that seemed to employ everybody in town. And nobody in the 1970s talked about what was going on at the laboratory. And I worked part-time at a local newspaper, and as I began to understand that the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory was one of 2 places in the United States that designed every nuclear weapon in the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile, and it wasn't being covered in the media, these questions were not being asked, I thought I needed to reflect and to come to grips with how I felt about nuclear weapons. And after doing research, after talking to people, after a lot of thought, I came to the conclusion that the use of nuclear weapons would be immoral under any circumstance. Nuclear weapons are an indiscriminate killing machine. And I decided I believed in global nuclear disarmament. And after a while, when you have a really strong belief, it's important to find a way to walk your talk. And for me, I actually got a phone call from someone I didn't know who was born in Livermore, who said, do you want to meet at my house and talk about nuclear weapons and see if we want to form a group? And I did. So I went. And I met other like-minded residents of Livermore and Tracy. And I learned something very important that day. I learned the most disempowering thing in the whole wide world is to believe you're the only person who thinks something. I met other people in my community who were concerned about nuclear weapons, when the laboratory said loudly every day that nobody in this community had any concerns. That was not true. So one of the first things that Tri-Valley Cares did was break down that barrier. We pierced the veil of secrecy. We began to talk about the Livermore Laboratory's nuclear weapons in the town square, in the letters to the editor. We had a group. We were public. We met. We had floats in the Livermore Rodeo Parade. And we talked about these issues, and we made it okay for other people in the community to talk about these issues. And this was a sea change. This was a big change in our community. And so whatever the issue, if you're watching or listening, if you have a passion, know that you're not the only one.
You were a very young woman at the time. You're still a young woman, but at the time this is important for the people to understand that anyone that decides to take the foot out of the wall and walk can build something very big. But there's been a long history to all of this. How do you keep the fire in your belly throughout the time? I understand that Tri-Valley Cares was founded in the 80s when there was a large movement, and it seems that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, everybody said, let's go home because everybody is now safe and everything is solved. But you have kept the hard work year after year. How do you keep that passion?
You've asked a lot of questions, actually, in that question. Nuclear weapons are important for everyone to think about and to consider and to take action on, because nuclear weapons are one of the things that can end life as we know it on the planet in an instant. When you think about the first U.S. atomic bomb that it dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, even as that bomb was falling, second after second after second, the people in Hiroshima didn't know what was coming. They went about their daily life. That could happen again at any moment. As humans, we try not to think about it. We put it in the back of our minds. But that very, very feeling like this is too much, too big, I can't think about it, that in and of itself is dangerous. If we think about it, if we talk about it, if we band together with other people to take action against nuclear weapons, it brings what's hidden out into the light of day, and it allows us to change U.S. nuclear weapons policy. And by changing U.S. nuclear weapons policy, we change global policy, and we actually make progress toward a world without nuclear weapons. And that's what motivates me every day, so that our children and our children's children and their children do not live in a world where everything could be taken away from them in an instant.
I am with Father Bill O'Donnell.
Yes.
And Bill O'Donnell was a native of Livermore.
Yes.
And when asked about his call to be a priest, he said that he was shoving manure here in Livermore. I said, there must be something better. So he left priesthood, but he still kept the connection to Livermore, and he remembered orchards in a peaceful, like sort of
Tomatoes.
town. And you have the contact with the neighbors. Do the neighbors, how the neighborhood has, adapted to this huge campus? It's 8,000 workers in the campus, right?
When you consider the subcontractors, that's about correct. Livermore is a very interesting town, I'll say that. If you look at the city seal, even to this day, our city seal has the L for Livermore actually imprisoned in the middle of the atom. The nuclear symbol is at the center of our city seal. So when you talk about neighbors, there are a lot of people who don't know very much about the laboratory, maybe moved in recently into the tract homes. There's another segment that works at the laboratory or has family that works at the laboratory, and there's an environment there that makes them afraid to talk about not only their work, but because we're not talking about classification. I never ask people to breach classification, but I just mean talking about their concerns. If you work at Livermore Laboratory, you are not protected by civil service. If your boss, if your supervisor wants to keep you from progressing, your supervisor can do that. You're in some ways at that supervisor's mercy, and we have had members who have been told by their supervisors, you will never, never get ahead here, no matter how smart you are, no matter how good your work is. So this makes people intimidated to speak. In an interesting way, people who work at the laboratory, some of them are disempowered. They are very privileged in certain ways, in terms of their money and their education, but in some ways they're a very disempowered population. And others have concerns. Certainly in our office, we get calls saying, I live in a cul-de-sac and I have 2 children with birth defects, and in our cul-de-sac we have a lot of children with birth defects. And my husband works at the lab, and I fear it's the lab. In Tri-Valley Cares, part of what we've done, and my background is journalism, so this is a part of it that I really love, is that we have documented the accidents, the spills, the releases, and we have documented that the Livermore Laboratory main site here in Livermore has released more than 1 million curies of radiation. And people might say, so what does that mean, more than 1 million curies of radiation? Livermore Lab scientists tried to look at how much radiation actually came down on the people of Hiroshima when we dropped the atomic bomb. The answer is 1 million curies.
Wow,
They have released that much, dribbled it out over time here. So truly, we are all hibakusha. We are all downwinders. Hibakusha is the Japanese word for an atomic bomb survivor. We are all connected. That radiation went out into the Bay Area and into the Central Valley, depending on which way the wind was blowing the day of the accident. And at Site 300, which is Livermore Lab's high explosive testing range, they have released countless curies that they didn't even count. That's why they're countless. Because for decades, they blew up test bomb components out there with radioactive materials in it, specifically depleted uranium and uranium-238, which has a radioactive half-life of 4.5 billion years. And tritium, which is the radioactive hydrogen of the hydrogen bomb, was also released into the air at Site 300. And again, it traveled on the wind. If the wind was blowing to the east, went to Tracy in the Central Valley. If we were having those Santa Anas that blow the wind to the west toward the ocean, it came to Livermore and the metropolitan Bay Area. We also know that a lot of the toxic and radioactive materials seeped into the ground from a variety of accidents and also bad hazardous waste practices. So that here in Livermore and also at Site 300 near Tracy, the groundwater is massively polluted. It's emanating from the lab, these toxic plumes. There's one outside the laboratory right underneath my old neighborhood here in Livermore from the main site, and there's an off-site plume at Site 300 that goes under Corral Hollow Road and under Corral Hollow Creek. And there is a smorgasbord, a buffet of different toxic and radioactive materials, particularly within the fence lines of these facilities. And as you heard Raisa say, Livermore Lab is a Superfund cleanup site. It's on the EPA's list of most contaminated sites in the country. The Livermore Lab main site was put on that list by EPA in 1987, and then they went out and took a look at Site 300, and they put that separately on the list in 1990. So Livermore Lab is famous, even in the annals of Superfund, because it's got 2 locations on that list of worst contaminated sites in the country. And the cleanup will cost billions, and it will take until 2060 to 2080 to complete. And there are some things that they do not know how to clean up, and they're not sure that it will be done by 2080.
What is the involvement of UC Berkeley? On the way here, we checked again our recollection of how the Manhattan Project went from being a secret project of the US government to this lab being part of Berkeley as administrator. And I also want you to elaborate a little bit of about the connectivity with the other facilities in New Mexico, if
Yes.
they are still under the
Okay.
jurisdiction of UC Berkeley, or they went private.
Okay, so there's a couple questions in that. Let me try to think how to say it clearly and simply. When the United States began the secret Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb, actually 2 atomic bombs, a uranium bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and then a plutonium bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. That was done in New Mexico, but also parts of it were done here in California, at the University of California at Berkeley and at the Berkeley Laboratory. And in 1952, Edward Teller in particular thought that Los Alamos Laboratory wasn't moving fast enough to design a hydrogen bomb. He wanted new kinds of bombs, and he wanted competition that would spur the development of new kinds of nuclear weapons. And that's why Livermore was founded in 1952. And to this day, Livermore is competition for Los Alamos, and to this day, it is spurring the development of new horrific nuclear weapons. For many decades, the regents of the University of California managed both the Los Alamos lab and the Livermore lab. It was just a University of California contract. And more recently, they have privatized those contracts so that the big nuclear weapons contractors can get in too. But to answer your question about the University of California, it is still part of the management group that manages Livermore Laboratory here in California and the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. And every nuclear warhead in the United States is still being designed at either Livermore Lab here in California or the Los Alamos Lab in New Mexico. So they are in some ways mirror images, and that is deliberate. That is to keep them competing so that more and more ideas for more and more horrible nuclear weapons are enabled. The joke during the Cold War was that the Soviet Union was the opponent. This was a joke at Livermore Lab, that Los Alamos was the enemy. And that's that deliberate environment of competition to really speed the development of nuclear weapons, and really, to some extent, to keep people from reflecting too much about whether or not that development is good. Because if you're in a competition for anything, you know that you reflect less. And so that's the culture, and that has only changed around the edges. It has not changed in its central core, and that's still one of the big problems. Tri-Valley Cares is working toward the day when Livermore Laboratory is a civilian science laboratory. This is something that is possible. Remember I said in the Manhattan Project, and right after the Manhattan Project, that the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory was involved in nuclear weapons. They have not been involved in nuclear weapons in decades. They no longer do any classified research. And while they're not above criticism, of course, they are in some ways a model of what Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory could become. The Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory is managed out of the Department of Energy Office of Science. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory is managed out of the Department of Energy National Nuclear Security Administration. It is managed to develop nuclear weapons. When you look at its budget, every year, more than 80% of its budget is for one budget line, and the name of that budget line is nuclear weapons activities. Everything else is done with 2% of the money or 7% of the money on the margins. More than 80% is nuclear weapons activities, most of which is design and development of new and modified nuclear weapons.
So they actualize the weapon every 5 years, every 4 years, and what happened with the material? So it's like a waste, like a nuclear waste?
So to answer your question, the activities to develop a new design or a modified design of a nuclear weapon so that it will have special features that the weapons designers want it to have, and I'll talk about those in a minute, that work is actually very dirty. When I first moved to this town, I imagined some scientists in white coats, just doing calculations, and certainly you do a lot of calculations. But you also have to use toxic and radioactive material in developing the different components. So Livermore Lab does not produce multiple copies of nuclear weapons for the nuclear weapons stockpile. That's done at other sites. But Livermore develops new things that the other sites then produce in great numbers. But Livermore has to produce components and test them and tweak them, and all of that is very, very polluting.
And for somebody that is watching, how large is the nuclear weapons arsenal of the United States and around the world? How many bombs do we need? Because that is an issue, it's a paradox, because you can destroy the world many times, and you can only do it once, pretty much, with the multiple warheads in these intercontinental, ballistic systems.
Right.
So how big is it?
Right now, there are all kinds of different nuclear weapons. There are gravity drop nuclear bombs from planes. There are nuclear warheads that are launched from planes. There are nuclear warheads that are launched from land-based silos, and nuclear weapons that are launched from submarines. And the United States has them all. There are, to use a round number, and the exact numbers are classified, but there are probably about 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world, and the United States and Russia contain more than 90% of those. So when we're talking about nuclear disarmament, there's a whole lot that the United States and Russia can do. And the other countries that have nuclear weapons, China probably has a little more than 300 operational. France, the UK, they're in that range, and then India and Pakistan have fewer than that. It's not known exactly how many North Korea has, but they're crude and probably closer to 10 or 20. I mean, it's not a lot. You asked what is the right number of nuclear weapons for any country to have, and the right number is 0. In order to get to 0, there's a lot of work that has to be done in the United States, and there's a lot of work that has to be done in Russia and between our two countries. Because we, the United States and Russia, we are like, the nuclear drunkards sitting on a bar stool telling somebody else not to have a drink. And if we are going to be forces for good, if we are going to be forces for global nuclear disarmament, we need to attend to our act. We in the United States and in Russia. And so I think the people in our countries have a huge responsibility.
Do you think that this would be the proper moment, because you are starting to touch the new weapons that Scott, informs the people about the issues of contamination and the suits that you're carrying on behalf of some of the workers in the lab? That would be.
So I'll start by talking about some of our work with workers at Livermore Lab. If you go back to the early days of the lab and even up until the 80s and 90s, workers have been exposed to radioactive and toxic chemicals in this work the whole time. Many of these exposures, however, take a long time to develop into an illness. So you often have workers who worked there for 15 years and were perfectly healthy, but exposed to low doses of radiation or to low amounts of toxic chemicals on a daily or weekly basis, or in some level, sometimes there's accidents and things like that occur, but they often develop illnesses later, especially cancers and other radiogenic illnesses. Oftentimes then those workers have retired or moved on, and to go back to the lab and with a claim that they had an illness was very difficult because the lab controlled all the documents, everything was classified and secret in nature. They were told while they worked there that they were never allowed to talk about their work. Oftentimes even their spouses and children had no idea what they were working on. Even a relationship with their doctors would be tenuous because they didn't want to tell their doctors what they were working on, things like that. Their only option was to try to bring a case in civil court where they didn't have any documents, or access to the documents was very difficult. So there was a major hurdle to get over in trying to sue the lab or bring any sort of claim for an illness. Finally, Congress took action in around the year 2000 and 2001 and created a program for these workers. It's called the Energy Employee Occupational Illness Compensation Program, and it allows for workers to make a direct claim to the Department of Labor. They intelligently housed it outside of the Department of Energy and put it in the Department of Labor. However, there is a high burden that the claimants must prove, a 50% threshold, that their illness was likely caused by their exposures on the job. They often need help doing these claims, and so I can act as an authorized representative and help them. I've helped dozens, over 100 workers make claims. Only about 50% of workers who make claims overall get their claims accepted. I'm able to help them at a much higher rate get claims accepted, thankfully, but it's still not easy. Of course, they're often very ill and elderly, and it can be a hard thing to do. At Livermore Lab specifically, there have been close to 3,000 employees who've made claims. And overall in the program, which you're eligible at sites from around the country, There's over 100,000 claims of former nuclear weapons workers who believe they've been made ill by on-the-job exposure in the program.
And you are a lawyer, you are an attorney, and you are a father.
Yeah.
And I must say that something that I admire of Mary Leah is that some of the institutions start aging and they don't recruit young people. You've always been surrounded by extremely brilliant young people.
Extremely brilliant.
Yes. And
Witness.
No, this is true.
It is true.
And I've been involved for maybe 12 or 15 years, if I count all. So, how do you get involved with this issue? That is, I am always curious, because you have more occupancy in this earth than we do. This is an intergenerational conversation that sometimes I talk to my children and they get alarmed and they shut off, because it's so important to show the bridge from here to the vision in the future of a nuclear-free world. But it's also an issue of legal grounds, because it is illegal. It's not right contamination. So you're carrying this battle in courts, and a young, brilliant father getting involved into this area is an important example. You become a role model for other young people, and I would hope that a lot of young Latinos develop this awareness and follow your steps. So how did you build the man that Scott Yunt is right now?
I have always had an interest in the environment, and my father was a nuclear worker at one point in his life, so I also had an awareness early on of nuclear weapons that I think many in my generation don't have in the same way, growing up in the post-Cold War era. And in studying the environment in college and in law school, I really perceived there being two kind of existential or large threats to the world's environment. One being climate change, and the other being nuclear weapons. And what really steered me towards nuclear weapons was a friend of mine named Tara Darabji, who I know you've met, started working at Tri-Valley Cares and really brought to my awareness the fact that our nuclear weapons development isn't so existential. It's not just the threat of a nuclear war, but in fact, development of nuclear weapons is polluting us right here and has been for a generation or more. And it has done so at all of the nuclear weapon sites, which are scattered throughout the country. It has in the form of accidents with nuclear weapons that thankfully have never resulted in a full detonation, but have contaminated sites around the world. It has in all of the nuclear weapon states that have tested nuclear weapons, and in the countries that many of those nuclear weapon states decided to test weapons in instead. For example, the United States tested many weapons in the Marshall Islands, and France tested weapons in African nations, or in an African nation at least. So that this existential threat that's similar to climate change actually had a very real impact that was happening now all over the world and in the backyard of where I lived, which is here in Livermore, a very close community to where I was living. And I was shocked, frankly, to learn of the level of contamination that has occurred in this community and the lack of awareness around it. And that so many of us in the country live near a nuclear weapons site and have very little awareness of the history and the location of the impact of nuclear weapons there, and that it's ongoing. I think many people in my generation do think that now we just maintain nuclear weapons, that have existed since the Cold War, and we're not really working on nuclear weapons anymore, and it's untrue. We are working on new nuclear weapons. The work continues to contaminate us. We continue to create huge amounts of nuclear waste with no solution for what to do with it in both the weapons complex and in the nuclear power context, but just specifically talking about weapons, lots of waste streams at Livermore Lab, at Los Alamos, elsewhere in the complex. We have an excess of nuclear weapon material that we have from weapons we've dismantled. We have many problems to deal with from nuclear weapons and haven't solved them. And accidents.
Could you please elaborate on the accidents? Because I have read in your bulletin and some other places, but there are these terrible accidents that nobody knows should be priority, and I share with you the shock to come in front of something that should be in the top of the awareness. Because we are like the orchestra of the Titanic, like they say. We are playing our instruments till the boat sinks. You know, so a little bit about those accidents. In particular, I would like eventually to bring the United Nations conferences on humanitarian consequences of a nuclear disaster. But you have catched here a lot of problems and accidents in the lab. Would you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I'd kind of like to start by saying that I think there are reported accidents at the lab, and there is also a history of secrecy. So there are accidents that we know about that have been reported, but in the work that I've done with workers and former workers at the lab, I'm always shocked to hear about things that were not reported. And they become difficult to verify other than a worker's memory of something happening on a table and having an accident occur and they shut down the facility, etc. So there's those accidents that are unreported, but there's also a system for reporting where they have, it's called the Unusual Occurrences Reports, and we review those as part of our monitoring work. Those are supposed to include any accident or incident where an employee might get injured, and they come out on a yearly basis and we review them. There was 18 that occurred in 2018. And we reported on those recently in our newsletter if people want more information. But they include things like nuclear material missing that they cannot find.
In transportation, I have seen
they are allowed to ship nuclear material via FedEx, and material went missing for a number of months. They ended up finding it, but there have been many instances where material is spilled in the box, and upon opening, it's either biological or radioactive material has been spilled, incidences like that. And then, of course, more typical lab accidents where something that is radioactive or toxic and an employee is working with it and they spill it, or it has some reaction that they didn't expect and ends up contaminating them, contaminating the room, contaminating instruments. So those things are extremely commonplace in the laboratory, despite their insistence that it's very safe there. And then the history of the lab shows us, too, that there have been very large accidents, including the second largest or third largest?
Second and third largest.
Second and third largest tritium accidents. Tritium is a radioactive hydrogen, and it is got a purpose in nuclear weapons. They do experiments with it at Livermore Lab, and they've had very large releases of tritium gas. Tritium then can bind to water and enter the human body, enter the environment in multiple ways. And it's very, very toxic.
The communities that are most impacted, let's talk about California because, I mean, it's all over, but like in California, which are the communities that are being affected?
Well, the most directly affected community, in my opinion, is workers at these sites.
Uh-huh.
So at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, we have 7,000 plus workers there every day, not all of whom work with these kinds of materials, but Many of them do. We also have Site 300, which is the high explosives testing range, which is out near Tracy. It's right on the border of town in Tracy, and there's far fewer workers there. However, the work they do is high explosives testing, which heavily pollutes the environment around the site, and workers get exposed to that pollution on site. And then after talking about workers at these two sites, you also have the surrounding communities, both of which both sites have had toxic groundwater spread off-site, and obviously air pollution from the activities at both sites spreads off-site very easily. There's also soil pollution at the sites, although that probably stays more in place. At Site 300, they've also buried waste that has caused soil and groundwater pollution. Elsewhere in California, there's the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, which is near Los Angeles and near the San Fernando Valley, where they had a nuclear accident in 1969 that contaminated the area and was a bad accident. We also have some nuclear power stations in California that have radioactive fuel rods on site and pose a very large danger in an area of earthquakes. But that's kind of another topic.
That's PG&E.
Mostly PG&E, although
Well, Southern
Onofre.
California, Edison,
Yeah.
yeah.
If a community want to close one of these places, what is the mechanism? What is the path to follow? Is we discuss in the Congress, we discuss this in the Sacramento Assembly, how we can shut down one of these places in the legal way?
So there are two pathways. One would be to shut down a location completely, and the other would be to take the location out of the nuclear weapons complex and make sure that it's doing only unclassified civilian science for the public good. Tri-Valley Cares has looked at this question, and we understand other people can come to a different conclusion. But we have decided that the opponent here, the problem here, isn't science, per se. It's nuclear weapons. It's the fact that science is perverted for nuclear weapons, and nuclear weapons are the opponent. Not so much the people individually who are being contaminated and coming to us for help, but the weapons themselves. And so we want to change Livermore Lab's mission entirely away from nuclear weapons, to take it out of the National Nuclear Security Administration and put it into the Office of Science, and to do unclassified science. So how could that happen? This is a federal laboratory, so Congress plays a large part. The money comes from Congress, and so Congress could offer more money for civilian science and offer less money for nuclear weapons. It's very hard for Congress, though, because the directors of Livermore Lab and Los Alamos Lab in particular go to Congress, and Congress mostly isn't made up of nuclear physicists. At most, there's usually one congressman who's a nuclear physicist, or congresswoman who's a nuclear physicist, or a physicist at all.
Or have any knowledge.
Or have any knowledge. And so you have these lab directors coming and saying, we need this, we need this, we need this. And so Congress is a little bit, in a way, disempowered, and they kind of give money for what the lab directors ask. And the reason I'm making this point is because the lab directors don't ask for money for civilian science. When the Livermore lab director goes and testifies, that person asks for money for nuclear weapons activities. And so I think that there are opportunities to convince Congress to spend more on civilian science, on global warming, and analysis and many other cleanup, many other things. But it's a problem that the weapons lab directors only want weapons. They want to stay a weapons lab here. I think that the public has a large role to play because Congress listens to some extent to what the public is saying. And so I do think that, we're having a huge demonstration at Livermore Lab that we're planning with other peace and justice organizations on Hiroshima Day on August 6th. And this is an opportunity for people to come and with their presence and with their bodies to say, I oppose nuclear weapons. Let's do something else with this laboratory. And so that's, what we're trying for. It's very difficult to make that kind of change when the institution doesn't want to change. And I think that the public and Congress have a huge role to play and that they haven't fully played that role.
Mary Leah, I would like just to add that this event on August 6th happened every single year, and it's been happening for many, many years.
Yes.
And also there is an ecumenic service on
Good Friday.
Good Friday, with the break of the dawn, and then, so the work of passing the information to the community and bring, as Scott said, to real life something that can be very scary but very abstract, nuclear weapons, to the life of your families and the communities. It's a work of good journalism that really goes to the heart and the minds of the people. And I would like Raisa to tell us about yourself and also a little bit, what are you seeing in the community? And my, respect for Mary Leah for having a Spanish-speaking outreach person. That is an investment. I must say funding is not generous for this kind of activities, I know from my own agency, but having the vision to open a satellite office in Tracy and having a Spanish-speaking person, as Mary Leah said, is Latina of the population in the Tracy area. So you have that knowledge. I don't. You know what the people say and think when you open the doors or invite them. What is your experience doing this work?
Ok, como ya sabemos, 40% de la población de allá de Tracy es latino. Mucha gente de San Francisco a ciudades cerca de Tracy se están mudando para Tracy y la población está creciendo. So, lo que yo hago es alcanzar a estos latinos, hablar con ellos, decirles lo que está pasando, qué hacemos a Tri Valley Cares, decirles lo que está pasando en el laboratorio de Livermore y en el sitio 300, que es el Site 300. Como ellos no saben, una de las cosas que más me he dado cuenta es que de verdad no saben lo que está pasando. Ni siquiera saben que hay un sitio 300 en Tracy, ni siquiera. Entonces lo que yo hago es traducir todos estos información de laboratorio, todo lo que hablamos en Tri Valley Cares, y yo envío esta información a ellos, hablo con ellos. Hacemos, ahora que tenemos la nueva oficina en Tracy, hemos hecho reuniones. Hubo una hace unos meses en Tracy que participaron mucha gente latina, y una de las cosas que me sorprende es ver en las caras cuando ellos van, ¿qué es esto? Sitio 300, que se están contaminando el agua, el aire, y menos saben de que hay una propuesta a incrementar estas pruebas de explosiones. Y cuando se se incrementan estas explosiones, más toxinas van al ambiente, se van al agua, se van al aire, las respiramos y por supuesto ellos se alarman, ellos no quieren eso para su ciudad. Cuando los vientos vienen, llegan al centro de Tracy, también van a Stockton y pues ahora es un medio más que ellos se están informando. También hacemos otros shows, por lo menos en el concilio, que fue en el Stockton, pusimos una mesa, pusimos toda la información y cada vez que la gente venía a la mesa, de nuevo, no sabían nada del sitio 300, nada del laboratorio de Livermore. ¿Cómo es posible? Especialmente la gente latina, ¿por qué se les ha tenido ocultos? ¿Verdad? Entonces ahora que tienen esta información ellos le dicen, ¿cómo podemos ayudar? Esa es otra cosa. ¿Qué podemos hacer para participar y hacer algo por la comunidad? No solamente sentarnos a casa y escuchar lo que está haciendo, ¿qué podemos hacer? Entonces nosotros le decimos, mire, podemos llamar, hacer llamados, mandar letters al periódico. Hay muchos periódicos en Tracy, Facebook. Sí, lo que ellos puedan escribir, lo que ellos aprendan, manden una carta al editor. ¿Qué es lo que está pasando en Tracy? Se está contaminando, no queremos esto, ¿cómo podemos hacer? Hablar con los legisladores. ¿Qué leyes pueden ustedes crear? ¿Qué pueden hacer de ayudarnos? ¿Qué va a pasar con nosotros? ¿Qué va a pasar con nuestros hijos? ¿Qué va a pasar con el futuro? Si nosotros no ponemos un stop, un paro a esto, va a seguir. Por lo menos mucha gente no sabe qué es el superfondo. Yo les digo que esto es una lista de que se ha puesto los lugares que se han puesto más contaminados en el país. En 1989, fue el sitio Livermore Lab, se puso en 1987. En 1987 se puso el grupo de el Livermore Lab, se puso en esta lista en uno de los más contaminadas áreas del país, imagínense. Y en 1990 se puso el sitio 300. Ya empezaron a saber que otras áreas más estaban contaminadas. Y entonces, para ver cómo se puede limpiar. Ahora, esa contaminación que ha pasado a través de muchos años, que han pasado atrás, cuando la Navy estaba aquí y eso, que no limpiaron bien, se ha quedado. Ahora tenemos los explosivos en el sitio 300 y entonces la limpieza va a tomar como 80 años. Y entonces con la administración que está pasando ahora mismo hay muchos problemas de presupuesto. No tenemos el presupuesto indicado para seguir estas limpiezas, ¿verdad? Entonces, si nosotros no observamos qué es lo que está pasando, pues el programa no continúa. Si se va a tomar 80 años y no cuidamos y no estamos al paso de que estos legisladores, pues va a tomar más tiempo. Entonces, ahora que se va a incrementar estas explosiones, pues va a haber más contaminantes, ¿verdad? Como ya les dije, hay pozos en Tracy que están contaminados, ya tienen el flag que no se pueden tomar, la bandera que no se pueden tomar el agua.
¿De veras? Los acuíferos.
Sí, ya están contaminados. Otra cosa que hacemos nosotros en Tri-Valley Cares es hablamos con los líderes, estamos conjuntamente con las agencias gubernamentales y no gubernamentales, como también como los líderes. Nosotros comunicamos con ellos lo que hacemos, le enseñamos lo que está pasando, le decimos del Superfund y ellos trabajan con nosotros. Entre más nosotros nos aliamos con otras agencias, más podemos hacer. Por lo menos hace unos meses atrás pudimos reunirnos con el congressman Josh Harner. Él estaba muy interesado en lo que está pasando y se adhirió a nosotros a mandar información y a trabajar conjuntamente con Tri-Valley Cares. So, básicamente la meta de nosotros es darles qué cantidad, cuánto más podemos hacer para esta limpieza. ¿Qué tan limpio quiere la ciudad? Ustedes, nosotros le decimos a la comunidad, ustedes deciden qué limpio quieren su ciudad, ¿verdad? ¿Qué ustedes quieren? Y juntos podemos hacer algo, ¿verdad?
Tengo una pregunta. Sí. Tengo entendido que hay casas, habitación en un radio de 5 millas desde el sitio 300. Y quisiera saber cuál es la zona restringida, digamos que gobernada por todo el Departamento de Energía, que estaría rodeada por estas cinturón civil. So the thing is, there are houses in a ratio of 5 miles, I read.
Yes.
And
There is no restricted area outside of the fence line. At the Livermore Laboratory main site, it's 1 square mile, and
just one school?
they're just 1 square mile, 600 buildings, more than 600, and you've got people walking their dogs on the sidewalk, you have apartments, you have homes, you've got a Little League field right outside the fence. At Site 300, there is no restricted area outside the fence. The site is about 11 square miles. It's bigger because that's where they do these high explosive blasts. Right across the street is a state park. It's a recreational vehicle park where people bring their dirt bikes. So any contamination that's settled in the dirt, you can imagine these kids on their dirt bikes are just, resuspending all of those particles. And there are homes that are being built now very close to the laboratory, Site 300, approximately a mile away. So there's no buffer zone outside of the fence line. You've got people right there breathing whatever is in the air.
And security. I know that demonstrators year after year risk, jail or being arrested at the lab because these are high security sites. But I do know that activists where the actual missiles are deployed have penetrated the areas just to show how vulnerable they are to a foreign agent or a terrorist to get inside of these facilities.
Yes. So at Livermore Lab, the U.S. Department of Energy actually has a team that does that. It's called force-on-force drills, where they send Department of Energy personnel to see whether or not they can penetrate the defenses. And what happened at Livermore Lab, and I need to say a couple things to set the groundwork here. The site knows they're coming. This is not a surprise. They try to penetrate at night when there are fewer employees, which makes it in some ways harder. Because obviously they're not going to do it during the day where there are employees in case there was, somebody pulled a gun and there was live fire. These are tests. These are force-on-force drills. And even with the laboratory knowing they were coming, and even with it happening at night, one part of this force was able to get in the laboratory's plutonium facility and secure the facility long enough to create a dirty bomb to detonate on site. And one group of these Department of Energy personnel doing this drill were able to get, it was fake plutonium that they put next to real plutonium, but it was still in the same exact site and location. They were able to take enough of the material off-site and leave without being found by the security personnel, enough plutonium to create a bomb anywhere. So Livermore massively failed these security drills. I could tell you a lot of detail. We used the Freedom of Information Act to get this detail. And we were able to use this information to change the security designation for the laboratory Livermore Laboratory used to be able to have more than 1,500 pounds of nuclear weapons grade plutonium on site, and thousands of pounds of weapons grade uranium on site. And after we found out and were able to document and publicize that they had failed these security drills, the security posture changed, and now they still have plutonium on site and they still have uranium on site, but much, much smaller quantities. They're not allowed to have enough to create nuclear weapons at this location because of that failure. So it is true that these materials, wherever they are held, are vulnerable.
The proposition, who people can vote to close these places. It's all the information what you handle, all what you said, is enough argumentation to have a proposition. People can shut down these places. And also it's part of the culture, because we see what happened with the cannabis product, when I was proposition finally happens. So if we can popularize these issues, we can have the tools probably to people can participate
Yes.
in the electoral process.
It gives a way for them to participate directly, and it's also a great educational tool during the campaign. The one thing that we have information, we have in some cases even pictures, we have people, we have the ability to give information in English and Spanish. The missing ingredient is money.
And I want to add just to that I think proposition would be an amazing symbolic effort and be
Yes.
a really important thing for raising the issue to the surface. However, because our propositions are for the state of California, similar to cannabis, the federal government is the entity in charge of nuclear weapons. So it would be like a proposition to make California a nuclear weapons free zone or something like that. But because the federal government can still just do whatever they want, given what, even if the state of California were to make its own law, just like we legalized cannabis, but it's still illegal according to the federal government, they would still claim that they could leave nuclear weapons here. But I agree with you that it'd be an important or maybe world-altering idea to have a state proposition that declared California a nuclear weapons-free zone.
I
would
just
be a
want to
great
a little insight of, for somebody that is listening to us. I know that anyone living in any place, they have this sense of false safety because the bombs happen elsewhere. It's not in the mainland. It's going to happen in Japan or in a colored country, like President Trump says, a shithole. It's like even Latin Americans that created the first and largest nuclear-free zone. They believe that this is an issue that we already solved. We are out of the problem. Nobody's going to ever drop bomb on us. We are never going to produce a bomb, so we are safe. But these are global situations, and I would like either one of you that would like to say what would be the consequence of a first strike that is, responded by any party involved. How would this affect other people, not only in the areas where the bombs are dropped?
Well, President Trump has said things that make it sound like he believes that if the United States were to use a nuclear weapon, particularly a low-yield nuclear weapon, as he calls it, but we're still talking Hiroshima or Nagasaki, that somehow the other country wouldn't respond. or it would only respond in the same exact manner. But there's no evidence for that. If the United States drops a nuclear weapon, that's the start of a nuclear war. We don't control how another country is going to respond. If they have nuclear weapons, they may unleash every single thing that they have, even before ours lands, because they won't know exactly what it is, and if it's the only one. And if it's a country that has a friend country that has nuclear weapons, that same thing could happen. So I think we have to all understand that the use of one nuclear warhead means that that's the beginning, it opens the door to nuclear war, and that it's like Pandora's box. We do not know where that's going to end. The other thing that I think the public insufficiently understands is that the effects of a nuclear weapon are different than any other weapon. Even if you realize that it vaporizes people and that it's horrifying, I think people don't understand that the consequences of a nuclear bomb are not bounded in space or in time. And here's what I mean. The fallout goes with the wind. It doesn't know a national boundary. Fallout doesn't say, I think I'm going to stay in this country because this is the country that got bombed. Fallout goes wherever the wind goes.
And the water.
And the water, and the food, and the impact. So it's not, a nuclear weapon is not, its impacts are not bound in space. They go out with the wind and the water and the food. And if enough nuclear weapons are used, it will cause a nuclear winter that will blot the sun, and there will be no agriculture, and millions will starve. It's also true that nuclear weapons are different than other weapons because they're not bound in time. What do I mean by that? If you're hit by shrapnel, you know you're hit by shrapnel. It doesn't happen 20 years later. Oh, look, I have shrapnel. But if you're hit by the radiation of a nuclear weapon, you can die a horrifying, lingering death from cancer and other diseases 15, 20, 25, 30 years later. So all of the victims of a nuclear bomb don't happen on that day. The victims happen year after year, decade after decade. The children are born with birth defects and with other deficiencies, generation after generation. So the effects of a nuclear weapon are unlike any other weapon in that they happen to everybody because of the fallout, and they happen for years, decades, and for generations because of the impact of radiation on your human DNA.
Don't you please leave the door open for participation, because that is the only solution known until now. And and I would like, if you have more questions, but I think that would wrap it up.
Yeah, one of our main campaigns that we have been working on for the last 2 years is taking place in Tracy because Site 300, which is right on the border of town, is the high explosives testing range for Livermore Lab. And it is a site where since the late 50s, they've been detonating large high explosives, but for the last decade or so they've been limited to just 100 pounds of high explosives per explosion. This is partly due to their acknowledgement that the community of Tracy has grown. In 1960, 11,000 people lived in Tracy. Now 90,000 people live in Tracy, and it's particularly growing toward Site 300. And in fact, they've proposed a very large housing development very close to the border, the fence line of Site 300, called the Tracy Hills Development, which is at Corral Hollow Road and Highway 580. There will be several thousand homes built there, and an office park and a water park that are all already approved by the city, and actually construction has begun. The site has proposed many times to increase its bomb blasting to no avail. They have not been able to increase it in frequency or size for the last 10 years or more. However, in 2018, they announced a plan to increase the size tenfold to 1,000 pounds of high explosives per blast, and they announced it by issuing an environmental environmental assessment under the National Environmental Policy Act that was very brief and concluded that there would be no possible impact to these increased bomb blasts, and had a very short timeline that coincided with Christmas and New Year's, in which the public could comment, and did very little outreach. We saw one little notice in the Tracy Press about it. Tri-Valley Cares was able to activate our community and get over 1,000 comments submitted on that initial environmental assessment, despite the very short timeline. Unsurprisingly, because they never have done otherwise, the Department of Energy gave themselves the stamp of approval to move forward with the project, despite the public concern that was expressed. However, they can't move forward until they get an air permit from the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. This is a very small state agency located in the whole Central Valley is its purview. It only regulates air. They have an office in Fresno and a small office in Stockton. This is not the normal type of permit that they issue, and it was very clear from their documentation that they were being very heavily lobbied by the lab, or very heavily influenced by the lab, to just go ahead and issue the permit. We demanded that they have a public hearing, and we had over 80 commenters at that public hearing in Tracy, and more than 1,600 people submitted comments opposing this plan. It overwhelmed the small district. They didn't even bring a court reporter to record the public comment at the public hearing, which I think indicated that they didn't think anybody was going to come and make a comment, let alone 80 people. So they conducted that public comment period back in August of 2018, and we are now waiting for them to make the final decision on the air permit, which we are expecting around September. So there's going to be another process in September. We don't know how they're going to decide. There's a wide variety of options for them. They could make the lab go back and make changes to their proposal. They could just issue the permit. Either way, they do have to respond to all of our public comments, and that will be an opportunity, not for further public comment, but for people to express their either dissatisfaction with how the comments were responded to make comments publicly to the media and etc. And to also, we will also put out information on our website and do analysis of that document and move forward in our opposition to the bomb blasts at Site 300 being increased. So I encourage listeners to pay attention to that and look for that in September. You can sign up to get our action alerts on our website, and we will for sure be issuing an action alert when we do hear what the Air District's decision is in that time frame of September and October. Yes.
Is there any way Governor Gavin Newsom could override the decision of his office?
That's a really good question, because this is one of the rare instances in which the state of California has some power over the federal lab, because they have to have an air permit to do these blasts, and the state issues it through this district. So yes, it would be something that the governor could weigh in on. Also, we've had interest from Josh Harder's office. He's the congressperson. That Site 300 is in his district for Tracy, and he has expressed willingness to oppose the permit, and we are working with his office to draft a letter. So we're going to work this from all angles, and yes, I think that having some state delegation of assembly members and potentially the governor, if he's interested, would be an effective thing to do.
Wow. Well, he seems pretty aware of issues that are not traditionally part of the agenda. So
Yes.
I guess he would be interested in at least learning more about what's happening. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to meet with him.
And then the good news is that Jerry Brown has, embraced the issue of nuclear weapons and is strange. We met with him and Jackie.
I saw him recently too.
Yeah, he's very honest, and I totally understand that a man his age, in person my age, you make the decision to put your life or whatever you have life left in the largest, more encompassing issues, which at this time in history is global warming and nuclear weapons. So I just want to honor you. You are the keepers of the hope, but hope is not something that goes up in the air. It's something that we have to build, we have to do, we have to vote, we have to know who our friends are, we need to make them accountable. And it is a great pleasure to announce that the Latino Caucus of Northern California has embraced this issue and is committed to support agencies like Tri-Valley Cares and other parties like the Radio Flash and KPFA, of course, to continue educating by now the largest ethnic group in the state, which are Latinos, and that is a big responsibilities. Along with rights come obligations, and we have the obligations to have a world for our children, just like our grandparents passed on to us. So with that, for the time being, we say goodbye, and we'll be found in the many, many stages that we may use as a Tribune to promote peace and disarmament.
Yes. For any of your listeners who want more information, they can go to our website, which is www.TriValleyCares, like it's all one word, TriValleyCares.org. They will find information in both English and Spanish. And RISA actually has created a complete section of the website that is in Spanish, where there's both flyers of upcoming events and also background information and analysis in Spanish.
Anybody else would like to? That's what. So that wraps it up.
Yeah.
Thank you for the
so
opportunity.
much.
It was,
Thank you.